pela quarta vez neste festival. Ele esteve aqui no nosso primeiro ano, há 7 anos, fez parte do júri e tem voltado sistematicamente, e eu tenho tido o prazer de, durante estes anos, manter uma relação de amizade muito forte com ele, pelo menos da minha parte, e este ano ele aceitou, inclusive numa conversa que tivemos há pouco tempo, não só fazer parte do júri das escolas de cinema, como além disso, fazer aqui uma referência do assassinato de John Fitzgerald Kennedy. E a ideia era depois, ao mesmo tempo que passava o célebre filme O Zapruder, que na realidade tem 26 segundos, mas nesta versão tem cerca de 11 minutos, ler as passagens do seu livro O Submundo, que diretamente estão ligadas ao filme. Portanto, vai haver aqui, espero que corra bem, porque a certa altura no próprio texto há uma referência ao começo das imagens, portanto ele começará sem o filme e o filme aparecerá a certa altura. E também aceitou muito simpaticamente, posteriormente, haver uma conversa com o seu tradutor português, o Paulo Faria, a quem eu agradeço a presença aqui, mais diretamente ligado com o livro Libra, que é o livro que ele escreveu, que tem como pano de fundo o assassinato de John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Portanto, é uma maneira nossa também de referenciarmos esse momento trágico e importante na história da América, e não só, e com um dos grandes escritores de língua americana que está aqui conosco. E agora vamos começar. Eu vou chamar Don DeLillo aqui a este púlpito. Muito obrigado.
The Zapruder film is the 26-second filmed record shot by an amateur of the assassination of President Kennedy. We've expanded the film here to 11 minutes and several seconds, slow motion, stop action, repetition. What you will see is a completely surreal set of images. Stop and go, start and stop. Here comes the car. Here comes the shot, like a fragment of film discovered in the future ruins of a national library. Whether in 26 seconds or 11 minutes, the Zapruder film does full justice to the confusion and bitter divisions engendered by the assassination itself. Here tonight, before the screening, I will give a brief account of the history of the Zapruder film, called by some people the most important 26 seconds in film history. It was that day in Dallas in November 1963. The motorcade moved through the city, and the president smiled and waved from the bright blue Lincoln. The rain had stopped. The limousine's bubble top had been removed. 2 Secret Service men in front, Texas Governor Connally and his wife in the jump seats, President Kennedy and the First Lady in the rear seat. The limousine was situated behind an unmarked pilot car and several motorcycles manned by white-helmeted city cops. The official caravan extended half a mile behind. Secret Service follow-up cars, communications cars, buses, motorcycles, station wagons, spare Chevys, Lyndon Johnson, Lady Bird Johnson, congressmen, aides, wives, men with Nikons, Rolleiflexes, newsreel cameras, radio phones, automatic rifles, shotguns, service revolvers, and the codes for launching a nuclear strike. There was also a man standing on a concrete abutment, watching the limousine approach the book depository. In his hands, an 8mm Bell & Howell movie camera. Director Series, it was called. And it had a telescopic lens and was loaded with Kodachrome 2 safety film, a color outdoor film. The man's name was Abraham Zapruder. He was a dress manufacturer in his late 50s, born in Russia, lived with his family in New York, a Dallas resident for the past 22 years. He wound the camera, set the speed control on run, the lens on telephoto. The motorcade turned left into Elm Street, and Zapruder pressed the shutter release. The film would then wind through the camera for 26.2 seconds. Or was it 22 seconds? Or 18 seconds? Or any of the other numbers that are part of the public record? The film is raw and shaky and unsettling. And all 486 frames have been scrutinized through the decades by experts in various disciplines. It is the basic timing device of the assassination and a major emblem of the way in which powerful events build their own networks of chaos and ambiguity. The physical evidence contradicts itself. The eyewitness accounts do not coincide. There are failures of memory. There are conflicting memories. For 50 years, responsible people have disagreed over the number of gunmen, the number of shots, the origin of the shots, the paths the bullets took, the number of wounds on the president's body, the size and shape of the wounds. How does such a vivid fragment of reality, caught on film before hundreds of eyewitnesses with trained security personnel on the scene, become so deeply lost in the maze of human perception? The president and the governor are hit, one shot or two. Then the fatal shot strikes the president, fired from front or rear. The fatal shot, the terrible, bloody headshot, frame 313, occurs in front of Zapruder, and despite the enormous shock, he keeps on filming, even as he cries out, "They killed him, they killed him, they killed him." The film is silent, and we can't hear the cries or the shots, but we can see Mrs. Kennedy's response and the swift action of the Secret Service man in the follow-up car. Zapruder went back to his office in a daze. Word began to spread, and the film became an immediate object of intense interest to the Dallas police, the FBI, the CIA, the Secret Service, and various news organizations. In the hours and days to come, the film would be processed, screened, and then sold to Time Incorporated. And in the years to come, the film would be used to support one or another theory and to dispute these same theories, and even to dispute the authenticity of the film itself. President Kennedy was shot on film. The accused assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was shot on television. The Oswald shooting was instantly repeatable. The Zapruder film became an exclusive commodity. Life magazine reproduced stills from the film in the next few years, but the film itself could not be shown legally until the mid-1970s. It was as though a certain social hierarchy was being maintained in the face of national tragedy. In time, The film would pass back to the Zapruder family, and legal entanglements and other matters would eventually involve the Justice Department, the Attorney General's Office, the Warren Commission, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the Assassination Records Review Board, and the National Archives. Then there are the names that have become embedded in American consciousness, beginning on the first day and now 50 years later, to be heard again. Names that carry an echo, a deep resonance encompassing not only local geography and national history, but half a century of argument, controversy, and a level of mystery that seems nearly metaphysical at times. The Texas School Book Depository, the sixth floor window, Dealey Plaza, Elm Street, the grassy knoll, the stockade fence, the triple underpass, Stemmons Freeway, Parkland Hospital, Love Field, and the Zapruder film. When he appeared before the Warren Commission in July 1964, Abraham Zapruder spoke about what he'd seen and heard, and then began to weep. After a pause, he apologized and continued his testimony, but he never used that camera again. To accompany the screening, I will read a passage from my novel Underworld. Two characters, a painter named Clara Sachs and her friend Miles, attend an illegal screening of the film in New York City in the early 1970s. The film will appear on screen here only after the narrative reaches a certain point. Miles took her to the studio of a video artist he knew. Not a studio, okay, but an ordinary set of rooms packed with equipment and TV sets where the guy lived and worked. People started arriving. There were people already there, and others started arriving, and there was a pungent trail in the air. The root aroma of marijuana rolled and toked communally, and a sense of some event not unlike the showing of a midnight film, only not so loose a group, a little beady-eyed, these people, wary of their own anticipation. They sat on the floor mainly. There were a few folding chairs and a sofa in one room, and a number of people stood huddled in corners. But most of them sat on the floor, which was covered with soda stains and unspeakable scuzz. TV sets were arranged in stacks everywhere in the flat, and other sets were parked individually on TV tables with copies of TV Guide. And there were sets with rabbit ears and a few odd mahogany consoles and every size screen, from the smallest imported eyeball to the great proscenium face of the household god. And one whole wall, in one room, there was a TV wall, maybe 100 identical sets banked, floor to ceiling. Clara and Miles stood in the corner, and she'd begun detaching herself from the event long before she got here, because she'd been told what it was at some point, but still had to see it, whatever the level of misgiving. The event was rare and strange. It was a screening of a bootleg copy of an 8mm home movie that ran about 20 seconds, a little over 20 seconds probably. The footage was known as a Zapruder film, and almost no one outside the government had seen it. Of course, the event had a cachet, an edge of special intensity. But if those in attendance felt they were lucky to be here, they also knew a kind of floating fear, a mercury reading out of the 60s, with a distinctly trippy edge. The footage started rolling in one room, but not the others, and it was filled with slurs and jostles. It was totally jostled footage. A home movie shot with a Super 8. And the limousine came down the street, muddied by sun glint, and the head dipped out of the frame and reappeared, and then the force of the shot that killed him, unexpectedly, the head shot. And people in the room went, oh, and then the next room, oh, and 5 seconds later, the room at the back went, oh. The same release of breath every time, like blurts of disbelief. And the woman seated on the floor spun away and covered her face because it was completely new, you see, suppressed all these years. This was the famous headshot, and they had to contend with the impact, aside from the fact that this was the president being shot, past the outer limits of this fact. They had to contend with the impact that any high-velocity bullet of a certain lethal engineering will make on any human head. And the shearing of tissue and brain case was a terrible revelation. And oh shit, oh God, it came from the front, didn't it? After a while, some people got up and left. Others got up and walked around. They didn't leave. The footage kept repeating, and they walked around. They stirred from their corners and visited the other rooms or stood in front of the TV wall. They were like tourists walking through the rooms of some small private collection, the Zapruder Museum, one item on permanent display, the 20-some-odd seconds of a home movie, and it runs continuously. It ran continuously. Men who carried the power of the state, the film muddied by sun glint, riding in a car with their confident wives, all the jostled quality of birthday footage. Or they stayed on the floor and passed a joint and just kept looking in an acquired sort of awe. Here comes the car. Here comes the shot. And it was amazing that there were forces in the culture that could out-imagine them, make their druggiest terrors seem futile and cheap. The footage ran at normal speed on some sets, slow motion on others, and the car moved down Elm Street and past the freeway sign, and the head dipped out of the frame and reappeared, and the shot was unexpected. Different phases of the sequence showed on different screens, and the spectator's eye could jump from Zapruder 239 back to 185 and down to the headshot and over to the opening frames. And on the TV wall, the sets and frames were geared to patterns. The TV wall was a kind of game board of diagonals and verticals and so on, interlocking tarots of elemental fate, or synchronous footage running in the next pattern. And whatever the mathematics of the wall, there were 100 images running at once. Here comes the car. Here comes the shot. And even though it wasn't part of the footage, Clara was sure there was a Hertz sign on top of the book depository. She'd seen it in photographs, forgotten about it until now, and thought it was another passing strangeness, however minor, a rent-a-car sign brooding over the motorcade. A man and woman stood in a closet with the door open, seemingly stoned and not especially noticeable, remotely making out. Clara happened to glimpse them when she went by. She knew she'd hear from Miles at dinner about the secret manipulation of history, or attempts at such, or how the experts could not seem to produce a clear print of the movie, or whatever. But the movie, in fact, was powerfully open. It was glary and artless and completely steeped in being what it was, in being film. It carried a kind of inner life, something unconnected to the things we call phenomena. The footage seemed to advance some argument about the nature of film itself, the progress of the car down Elm Street, the movement of the film through the camera body, some shareable darkness. This was a death that seemed to rise from the steamy debris of the deep mind. It came from some night of the mind. There was some trick of film emulsion that showed the ghost of consciousness, or so she thought to wonder. She thought to wonder if this home movie was some crude living likeness of the mind's own technology, the sort of death plot that runs in the mind because it seemed so familiar. The footage did. It seemed a thing we might see, not see, but know, a model of the nights when we are intimate with our own dying. Someone passed her a joint. She passed it back. On a large console, the screen was split 4 ways, and the headshot ran in every sector. And it's outside language, Miles said, which was his way of saying far out, or too much, or the other things they used to say. And here was an event that took place at the beginning of the 60s, seen belatedly, that now marked the conceptual end, carrying all the delirium that floated through the age. And people stood around and talked, and the pot fumes grew stronger, and people said, let's go eat, or whatever people say when a thing begins to be over. It ran continuously. A man in his 40s, in a suit and tie, and all the sets were showing slow motion now, riding in a car with his confident wife. And the footage took on a sense of elegy, running ever slower, running down, a sense of greatness, really. The car's regal gleam, and the murder of some figure out of dimmest lore, a greatness, a kingliness, the terrible mist of tissue and skull, so massively slow on Elm Street. And they got something to eat and went to the loft, where they played cards for a couple of hours and did not talk about Zapruder.